Story 1. The Wendigo of Pine Hollow. It started as just another campfire night out by Pine Hollow. Me, Kyle, and Emma had driven out with a couple of six-packs, thinking we'd make the most of a quiet Saturday. Emma kept warning us about the Wendigo, the thing that's been said to stalk these woods. Apparently, it looks human but ain't, with long, bony limbs and a face stretched too tight over a skull. I laughed it off. Come on, Emma. Wendigos? That's just some Native American myth. We're too far south for that stuff. Kyle chimed in, his mouth half full of chips. Yeah, Em, relax. It's probably just deer you've been hearing about. He popped open another can of beer, the hiss cutting through the still air. But when the fire started flickering in the wind that wasn't blowing, something deep in my gut said, maybe I should have listened to her. You know when the air feels too thick, like something's watching you, even though you can't see it? That's how it felt. The woods went dead quiet too. No bugs, no rustling, just our breathing and the crackle of the fire. Kyle was midway through telling some lame joke when Emma suddenly stiffened. Her face went pale, like she was seeing something she wished she hadn't. I followed her gaze. At the edge of the firelight, a figure stood, too tall, too thin. Its limbs were all wrong, like someone had stretched a person out on a rack. The firelight flickered, catching its eyes, and I'll never forget that hollow black emptiness that stared back. Its eyes reflected the flames, but there wasn't any light in them, just hunger. It took a step forward, its body cracking like dry branches, and I swear to God it smiled, or tried to. Its face was too tight for the skin to move right. Run, Emma whispered, and we did. We tore through the woods, branches whipping our faces, Emma's breath ragged behind me. Kyle was ahead, but not by much, and I could hear something crashing through the trees not far behind us. Every time I looked back, I'd see those eyes, closer than they had any right to be. We didn't stop until we hit the car. Kyle fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before getting the door open. We piled in, and as he revved the engine, I caught one last glimpse of it, standing at the tree line, watching us with that same grin. I thought we were safe, but Emma's been acting strange ever since. Sometimes I'll catch her staring off into space, her face blank and pale, like she's seeing it all over again. I don't think we outran it. I think it's still watching us. Story 2. The Lights of Burnt Creek. Everybody in town's heard the stories about Burnt Creek. It's out past the old mill where they say a family died in a fire back in the 60s. My friends dared me to go out there one night, just to see if the rumors were true, about the lights. They say that if you stand on the old bridge over the creek at midnight, you'll see these glowing orbs, like lanterns, floating just above the water. My buddy Jake said it's just swamp gas. Science, man, nothing supernatural about it. But he wasn't there. It was just me and Shelby. She was nervous, biting her nails the whole drive out. We pulled up to the bridge, the wooden boards creaking under the weight of my truck. The air was damp, thick with that rotting smell you get near water that doesn't move much. We climbed out, and Shelby immediately pointed to the far side of the creek. Look. There they were, 3 glowing orbs, just hovering, barely touching the surface of the water. They moved slowly, like they were drifting on the current, but there wasn't any wind or ripples. I wanted to laugh it off, say it was swamp gas, but something about them didn't sit right. They felt wrong. I took a step closer, but Shelby grabbed my arm. Don't. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the panic in it made me pause. The lights stopped moving. I swear they were staring at us, even though they didn't have eyes. I know how that sounds, but I could feel them watching. One of the orbs started drifting closer to the bridge, and I could feel this cold chill crawl up my spine. The air got heavy, like something was pressing down on us, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe. Shelby was shaking, her grip on my arm tightening, and then I heard it, a voice, low and raspy, whispering my name. I froze. It came from the orb. Come closer, it whispered, just a little closer. I yanked Shelby back to the truck. I wasn't about to find out what those things really were. We sped out of there, gravel kicking up behind us, and I didn't look back. Jake laughed when I told him about it. You're just scared of some lights, man. Swamp gas, like I said. But I can still hear that voice in my head sometimes, and every time I drive past Burnt Creek, I swear I can see the lights just out of the corner of my eye. Story 3. The Thing in the Abandoned House. There's this old house off Route 52, been abandoned for decades. You know the type. Windows busted out, roof sagging, the whole deal. Everyone in town says it's haunted, but they also say it's a good place for kids to sneak off to drink or whatever. So naturally, we had to check it out. Me, Joey, and Taylor broke in one night, around Halloween, thinking we'd get some creepy thrills, maybe snap a few pics to scare people at school. The second we stepped inside, though, I felt something was off. The air was thick and stale, like it hadn't been breathed in forever. Dust floated in the light of our phones, and the whole place smelled like mildew and rot. Smells like your grandma's house, Joey joked, but even he wasn't laughing for long. We went room to room, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Each room felt worse than the last, like colder. Taylor kept glancing over his shoulder, even though there wasn't anything there. Yet, we made our way upstairs, and that's when I heard it. This faint shuffling sound, like something moving behind us. I spun around, but there was nothing there. You hear that? I asked, but Joey shrugged it off. Probably rats, man. Old houses like this are full of them. But I knew it wasn't rats. The sound was too heavy. It followed us, step for step, until we reached the attic door. Joey was all about going up there, but I wasn't so sure. I'd heard the stories about the family that used to live here, the father who went crazy, killed his kids, and hanged himself in the attic. I wasn't in the mood to meet his ghost, but Joey insisted, so up we went. The attic was pitch black, the air thick with dust. Joey swung his flashlight around, but it didn't reach the far corners. That's when I saw it, just barely, out of the corner of my eye. Something moved. Did you see that? I whispered. Taylor nodded, his face pale. He didn't even try to joke about it. Something shuffled again, this time louder, closer. I felt this creeping sense of dread, like the air itself was trying to choke me. Joey stepped forward, and suddenly, the attic door slammed shut behind us. I swear, I felt something brush against me, cold and wet, like fingers. We bolted. Joey practically threw himself down the attic stairs, and we didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for breath. I don't know what was in that house, but we left it behind, or at least we thought we did. Lately, I've been hearing footsteps at night, in my own house. Story 4. The Screaming Well of Hollow Hill. Everyone knows about the well out in Hollow Hill. It's been there since the 1800s, and the story goes that a woman named Lila was thrown in by her husband after she found out he was cheating. They say her screams can still be heard at night, echoing up from the well. I didn't believe it. I mean, come on. Ghosts? Screaming wells? It sounded like the kind of stuff parents tell kids to keep them from playing near it. But last summer, my friends dared me to go out there at night, just to prove it was all BS. We got there just after midnight. It's not a big well, just a stone circle with moss growing all over it. The air around it felt colder than it should have been, like there was a breeze even though the trees weren't moving. Come on, yell into it. My buddy Travis laughed, shoving me forward. I rolled my eyes and leaned over the edge, staring down into the black pit. Lila, I shouted, my voice echoing back. You there? Nothing happened at first, just silence. I laughed and turned to leave, but then we heard it, a faint cry, like a woman sobbing, but it was deep, coming from far below. The hairs on my neck stood up. You hear that? I asked, but I didn't need to ask. We all heard it. The sobbing got louder, like it was rising up from the bottom of the well, echoing against the stone walls. It wasn't just sobbing anymore, it was screaming. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of prank, maybe some kids hiding nearby messing with us. But Travis turned pale, his eyes wide as he stared into the well. Man, we gotta go. Before we could move, the sound shifted. It wasn't just coming from the well anymore, it was all around us. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The screaming turned into words, a voice so full of rage it made my knees go weak. Help me, it hissed, the words twisting through the air like smoke. I backed away from the well, my heart pounding in my chest. Travis, let's go, I said, but when I looked at him, he wasn't moving. He was just staring, wide-eyed, into the darkness. She's here, he whispered. His voice was flat, like he wasn't really there anymore. I grabbed his arm and yanked him back. That's when I felt it, this cold hand, grabbing my ankle, pulling me toward the well. I looked down, and there was nothing there, but the grip was tight, freezing, dragging me closer to the edge. I screamed, kicking at whatever had me, and suddenly it let go. Travis snapped out of whatever trance he was in, and we ran, faster than I've ever run in my life. We didn't stop until we were back in the truck, the well far behind us. We don't talk about that night anymore, not after what happened to Travis a few weeks later. He went back to Hollow Hill alone, said he wanted to prove it was all in his head. They found him at the bottom of the well, dead from a broken neck. They said he must have slipped and fallen, but I know better. That hand, it wasn't letting him leave. Story 5. The Goatman of Black Ridge. We'd been hearing stories about the Goatman since we were kids. It's this local legend, like Bigfoot but creepier. People say he's part man, part goat, with horns and hooves, and he stalks the woods around Black Ridge. Some say he's an escaped experiment from a nearby lab. Others think he's some kind of demon. Anyway, me and my cousin Brad decided to camp out there one summer, just to see if we could catch a glimpse of him. Stupid, I know, but we were 17 and bored out of our minds. We packed up some snacks, a tent, and a couple of flashlights, and headed into the woods. The sun was setting by the time we reached a clearing near the ridge. We set up camp, got a fire going, and started talking about all the Goatman sightings people claimed to have had. Brad was laughing it off, saying it was probably just some dude in a costume trying to scare tourists. But as the night wore on, things got weird. It started with this faint, high-pitched bleating sound, like a goat, but off somehow. Too deep. Too angry. Brad stopped talking mid-sentence, his face serious for the first time that night. You hear that? He asked, scanning the tree line with his flashlight. I nodded, my stomach twisting into knots. The sound got closer, but we couldn't see anything in the dark, just the trees, casting long shadows in the moonlight. Then came the smell, this awful, rotting stench, like something had died nearby. It hit us hard, making us gag. "I'm not liking this, man," I muttered, grabbing my flashlight and shining it around the campsite. That's when we saw it. Two glowing eyes, low to the ground, just beyond the firelight. They weren't like an animal's eyes. They were too intelligent, too focused on us. My heart was pounding, and Brad's face had gone white. He whispered, "Goatman." The eyes rose up, standing tall, way too tall for any normal animal. And then, in the flickering light of our fire, we saw it. A massive, hunched figure with long horns curling back from its head. Its face looked almost human, but twisted and wrong, like someone had taken a man's face and stretched it over a skull that didn't fit. It took a step forward, and that bleating sound came again, but this time it was mixed with a deep, guttural growl. My legs froze, like my brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Brad wasn't as lucky. He bolted into the woods, screaming for help, but he didn't get far. The thing lunged after him, moving faster than anything that big had any right to. I don't remember how I made it out of there. One minute I was standing frozen by the fire. The next I was running through the woods, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the truck, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Brad was never found. They said he probably got lost in the woods and fell somewhere, but I know what happened. I saw the Goatman take him, and I'll never forget the sound of that bleating mixed with his screams. I don't go near Black Ridge anymore, and I don't talk about Brad, but every now and then, late at night, I think I can hear that same bleating sound, faint and far off, like it's still out there, waiting for me to come back. Those are the kinds of stories you hear growing up around here. People laugh them off, but I know better. Some things you can't explain, and some places you just don't mess with.